Gary Williams had always believed that silence was the safest place in the world. Silence never argued, never lied, and never disappointed him. That belief lasted until the morning he turned 34. He was standing in line at a neighborhood coffee shop when a sentence suddenly echoed inside his mind. "The man behind me is wearing the wrong shoes for that suit." Gary instinctively looked around, expecting someone to have spoken, but every customer remained quiet. A few seconds later another sentence arrived. "I hope they still have cinnamon rolls. I skipped breakfast again." The thoughts came from the woman standing ahead of him, although her lips never moved. Confused, Gary rubbed his temples. Assuming exhaustion was playing tricks on him. Then the cashier smiled politely and asked, "Good morning. What can I get for you?" At the exact same instant another voice appeared inside Gary's head. "Please don't order something complicated. My shift has only just started and I'm already tired." Gary froze. The words were perfectly clear, carrying emotion without sound. He cautiously ordered a plain black coffee. The cashier looked pleasantly surprised. "That's easy. Thank you." Her hidden thought immediately followed. Finally, someone simple. Gary walked outside with his coffee untouched. The city looked exactly the same, yet nothing sounded normal anymore. Every person passing him produced invisible conversations that only he could hear. A businessman smiled while thinking about canceling a meeting he had pretended to value. A teenager laughed with friends while secretly worrying that nobody actually liked him. An elderly woman complimented a stranger's dog while silently remembering the pet she had lost years earlier. Gary realized he was hearing thoughts, not voices. Every passing face carried an entire unseen world. He hurried home, locked the apartment door, and sat in complete darkness. The silence he had once trusted had disappeared forever. Hoping to prove himself wrong, he called his younger sister, Julia. She answered cheerfully. "Hey, Gary. Everything okay?" Before she spoke another word, her thoughts reached him effortlessly. "He only calls during the week when something is bothering him." Gary swallowed hard. "I'm fine. Just wanted to hear your voice." Julia laughed softly. "That's sweet." Her mind whispered something different. "He's definitely hiding something." Gary asked random questions, testing what he could hear. Every spoken sentence was accompanied by another invisible layer. Sometimes the thoughts matched perfectly. Sometimes they only partly agreed. Occasionally they completely contradicted the words leaving her mouth. Yet none of the hidden thoughts were malicious. They were simply honest. By evening Gary made one astonishing discovery. He could only hear the minds of people he could see or directly speak with. Television interviews remained silent. Radio broadcasts revealed nothing beyond the spoken words. But whenever another person entered his presence, their private thoughts unfolded with effortless clarity. Over the next several days Gary attempted every explanation he could imagine. Stress. Hallucinations. A neurological disorder. He visited a doctor, who performed routine examinations. "Everything seems perfectly healthy," the physician said confidently. Gary simultaneously heard the doctor's unspoken concern. "He's anxious, but I don't see anything physically wrong." That confirmed it. The ability was real. More unsettling was another realization. Nobody could deceive him anymore. Every compliment, every excuse, every promise arrived alongside the truth hidden beneath it. The world had not become dishonest overnight. It had simply become transparent. Standing outside the clinic beneath a gray afternoon sky, Gary watched hundreds of strangers cross the busy intersection. Their thoughts flowed around him like countless invisible rivers, overlapping without becoming confusing. Some dreamed about vacations. Others regretted forgotten conversations. Many worried about ordinary bills, lonely evenings, unfinished goals, or tomorrow's responsibilities. For the first time in his life, Gary understood that every ordinary face concealed an extraordinary amount of unseen life. And as he listened to the endless current of honest thoughts surrounding him, he wondered whether discovering the truth about everyone would become the greatest gift he had ever received, or the heaviest burden he would ever carry. The following morning Gary left his apartment determined to treat the strange ability like a scientific experiment instead of a curse. If he was truly hearing thoughts, then he needed to understand the rules before the ability understood him. He chose a crowded park because people naturally interacted there without expecting deep conversations. A father pushed his daughter on a swing while smiling warmly. Higher would make her laugh, but not too high. I promised her mother I'd be careful. His spoken words matched perfectly. Ready for another push. Nearby, two old friends greeted each other enthusiastically after several months apart. We should meet more often, one of them said. His thoughts quietly added, life keeps getting busier than I ever imagined, but I really do miss these conversations. Gary noticed something important. Hidden thoughts were rarely cruel. They were complicated. Most people carried kindness and uncertainty at the same time. They loved while doubting themselves. They smiled while worrying about tomorrow. The world was less dishonest than it was conflicted. Later that afternoon Gary visited a grocery store. The cashier apologized because one discount had not been applied correctly. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, she said politely. At the same moment Gary heard, please don't yell. It's not even my mistake. He simply smiled and replied. It's all right. We can fix it together. Relief instantly flooded her mind. Thank goodness. I needed one easy customer today. Walking home, Gary realized something unexpected. Knowing people's thoughts made him more patient instead of more suspicious. He understood the invisible fears hiding beneath ordinary conversations. Small acts of kindness suddenly carried much greater meaning because he could hear how deeply they affected others. Days passed, and Gary developed quiet habits to protect himself. He avoided crowded trains whenever possible because hundreds of overlapping thoughts became mentally exhausting. He discovered that eye contact strengthened clarity, while greater distance softened individual voices into a distant background murmur. He also learned that sleeping well reduced the overwhelming sensation. Fatigue made every thought feel louder. His greatest challenge came during a family dinner. Julia invited him over, insisting he had been isolating himself too much. Their parents joined them, filling the apartment with familiar laughter. As everyone spoke about ordinary topics, Gary listened to another conversation unfolding beneath the spoken one. His mother smiled while serving dinner. I hope everyone enjoys this. Family meals matter more than they realize. His father joked about retirement. I hope I made enough good decisions for them growing up. Julia teased Gary for being unusually quiet. Please tell me what's bothering you. I hate seeing you like this. None of them lied. None of them pretended. Their thoughts simply revealed emotions that words often struggled to express. For a brief moment Gary considered telling them everything. He imagined saying, I can hear what you're thinking. Before he could speak, he already knew how each of them would react. Confusion. Concern. Disbelief. They would never truly believe him, and even if they did, they would never feel comfortable around him again. So he remained silent. On his walk home, rain began falling across the quiet streets. Gary stopped beneath a bus shelter beside an elderly stranger. The man sighed as he watched the rain. Looks like we'll be waiting a while, he said. Gary nodded. Then the familiar unspoken voice appeared. My wife loved rainy evenings. I still catch myself wanting to tell her about them. Gary glanced toward the old man, whose gentle smile hid years of quiet grief. Without thinking, Gary replied, I hope your best memories stay with you. The man looked surprised. His thoughts immediately brightened. That's exactly what I needed to hear today. Thank you, he answered softly. You have no idea how much that means. As the rain continued to fall, Gary realized his extraordinary ability was changing him in ways he had never expected. He had imagined that hearing every hidden truth would make humanity seem darker. Instead, it revealed how much invisible love, fear, hope, regret, and courage existed inside ordinary people every single day. Yet one question continued to haunt him. If nobody could ever lie to him again, would he eventually lose the ability to trust spoken words at all, or would he finally learn what genuine trust was really meant to be? A week later Gary had become skilled at living with the constant flow of unspoken thoughts. He no longer reacted every time a stranger silently judged the weather, worried about a forgotten appointment, or wondered what to cook for dinner. The voices had become part of the rhythm of everyday life. What still surprised him was how often people misunderstood one another simply because they never heard the thoughts that stayed hidden. One quiet afternoon Gary visited a small bookstore, hoping the peaceful atmosphere would calm his mind. The shelves were nearly empty except for a young woman reading near the window. She looked up and smiled politely when he entered. Please let someone buy one of these novels today. They've been sitting here for months. Gary realized she worked there. Can I help you find anything? She asked. Her thoughts continued. He looks like someone who actually enjoys reading instead of decorating shelves. Gary smiled. I'm just looking around. She nodded. Take your time. Good. No pressure. People usually leave if I talk too much. Gary wandered between the shelves, amused by the contrast between her calm words and her lively thoughts. Unlike many people he had met, she seemed remarkably honest with herself. Her spoken sentences never strayed far from what she truly believed. After several minutes she approached again, holding an unfamiliar novel. If you like stories about impossible things happening to ordinary people, you might enjoy this one. I hope he doesn't think that's a strange recommendation. Gary accepted the book and laughed softly. Actually, impossible stories sound perfect right now. She tilted her head with curiosity. That sounded more personal than he intended. I'm Maya, she said, extending her hand. Gary. The moment their hands met, Gary expected the usual clear stream of thoughts. Instead, there was only silence. Complete, impossible silence. He blinked in confusion. Maya looked at him with the same friendly expression, but her mind remained completely beyond his reach. For the first time since his strange gift had appeared, another person's thoughts were hidden from him. He quickly released her hand, wondering whether something had interrupted the ability. A customer entered the store behind him. Immediately another familiar thought echoed inside his mind. I only came in because it's raining. The gift still worked. It simply did not work on Maya. She smiled. You look surprised. Gary searched for an excuse. I was just thinking. Why did he suddenly become nervous? There it was again. He could hear the customer. He could hear everyone else inside the bookstore. Only Maya remained silent. That silence fascinated him more than all the voices surrounding them. Over the next hour they talked about novels, films, and travel. Gary found himself paying attention to her spoken words because they were all he had. Without hidden thoughts guiding every conversation, he had to guess her emotions the same way everyone else did. It felt strangely refreshing. He listened more carefully. He noticed pauses, expressions, and small smiles he normally ignored because thoughts revealed everything instantly. When Gary finally purchased the recommended novel, Maya smiled warmly. I hope you enjoy it. This time there was no invisible confirmation, no private opinion, no hidden emotion. Just her words. Walking home with the book under his arm, Gary realized he had spent an entire hour talking to someone without hearing a single unspoken thought, and he had enjoyed every minute of it. For the first time since gaining his extraordinary ability, conversation had felt natural instead of predictable. That evening he could think of little else. Who was Maya? Why was her mind completely silent to him? Was she somehow immune to his gift, or was there another explanation he had not yet imagined? As he placed the novel on his bedside table, he made a quiet promise to himself. He would return to the bookstore the next day, not because he needed another book, but because for the first time in weeks, he had met someone whose truth he could only discover the ordinary way. The next afternoon Gary found himself standing outside the bookstore several minutes before it opened. He smiled at the realization that he was actually nervous. For weeks he had known exactly what everyone around him was thinking before conversations truly began, but with Maya he had no invisible advantage. He had to rely on patience, expressions, pauses, and the natural flow of dialogue. When she unlocked the door and noticed him waiting, she laughed. You must have finished the book faster than anyone in history. Gary laughed as well. Not quite. I wanted another recommendation. Maya welcomed him inside. Then you've come to the right place. They spent nearly an hour walking through the shelves. Maya spoke enthusiastically about forgotten authors, unusual endings, and characters who changed because of simple choices rather than dramatic events. Gary listened with complete attention. Every sentence mattered because there was no second voice explaining what she truly meant. For the first time since receiving his strange gift, he discovered how much could be learned simply by allowing another person to finish speaking without searching for hidden meanings. While they talked, customers entered and left the store. Gary continued hearing their thoughts without effort. One young man compared book prices with an online shop. A mother wondered whether her son was old enough for adventure novels. An elderly customer secretly hoped someone would recommend a book that reminded him of his youth. The invisible chorus surrounded Gary as always, yet Maya remained a peaceful silence at its center. Eventually she asked, "You always seem to notice people before they notice you. Have you always been that observant?" Gary hesitated. The truthful answer was impossible. "I suppose I've started paying more attention recently." Maya nodded thoughtfully. Most people hear words. Very few people actually listen. Her sentence lingered in Gary's mind long after she said it. As the afternoon passed, they decided to walk to a nearby cafe after Maya finished work. They spoke about childhood memories, favorite places to travel, and dreams that had quietly changed over the years. Gary realized something unexpected. Without hearing Maya's thoughts, he occasionally misunderstood her, asked follow-up questions, and discovered answers he never would have known if his ability had simply revealed everything at once. Their conversation unfolded naturally, full of curiosity instead of certainty. On the way home they crossed a busy square filled with musicians, families, and tourists. Gary heard dozens of private thoughts flowing around him. "I hope my performance earns enough today. That little girl reminds me of my daughter. I shouldn't have sent that message. Maybe tomorrow will be easier." The thoughts no longer overwhelmed him. Instead, they reminded him that every stranger carried a story invisible to everyone else. Maya noticed him quietly observing the crowd. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Gary looked around at the hundreds of people moving through the evening light. "I'm thinking that everyone is carrying something we can't see." Maya smiled gently. "I believe that's true." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before she added, "That's why I try not to judge people too quickly." Gary found himself smiling. If only she knew how accurate those words were. As they said goodbye outside the subway entrance, Maya waved. "Same time next week?" Gary answered without hesitation. "I'd like that." Watching her disappear into the crowd, he realized something extraordinary. Every relationship he had formed since gaining his gift had become easier because he always knew the truth before anyone spoke. Yet those relationships also felt strangely incomplete. With Maya, uncertainty existed again, and with uncertainty came surprise, discovery, and trust. Walking home beneath the evening sky, Gary understood that perhaps the greatest mystery in his life was no longer why he could read almost every mind. The greatest mystery was why one person remained unreadable, and why that single silence had become more meaningful than all the thoughts he could hear from the rest of the world. Over the following weeks, Gary and Maya settled into an easy routine. Every Saturday afternoon she closed the bookstore early, and they explored a different corner of the city together. Sometimes they visited quiet museums. Sometimes they sat beside the river with coffee and talked until sunset. Gary continued hearing the thoughts of everyone around them. A street musician silently hoped someone would request his favorite song. A waiter worried about an important exam the next morning. A little boy proudly wondered if his drawing was good enough to show his father. The hidden voices never stopped, but Gary had learned to let them pass like clouds instead of trying to follow each one. Only Maya remained wonderfully quiet. That silence had become comforting rather than confusing. One afternoon they wandered through a small botanical garden filled with colorful flowers and winding paths. Maya stopped to admire a greenhouse covered in climbing vines. "Do you ever feel," she asked, "that people spend too much time pretending everything is fine?" Gary looked at her carefully. Normally he would already know the reason behind such a question, but with Maya he had only her expression to guide him. "Sometimes," he answered. "Why do you ask?" She smiled faintly. "Because everyone seems afraid of showing who they really are." Gary thought about the thousands of minds he had listened to during the past month. He knew she was right. Nearly everyone hid worries, hopes, and dreams behind ordinary conversations. "I think," he replied slowly, "most people aren't trying to deceive others. They're trying to protect themselves." Maya considered his answer for several seconds before nodding. "I like that explanation." Her words stayed with Gary long after they left the garden. That evening he returned home feeling an unfamiliar pressure. He had kept his extraordinary ability secret from everyone, including the one person he trusted most. Every conversation with Maya made the secret feel heavier. He wondered whether honesty required telling the truth even when the truth sounded impossible. Several days later he returned to the bookstore carrying 2 cups of coffee. The shop was quiet, and rain tapped softly against the windows. Maya accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. "You always remember exactly how I like it." Gary laughed. "I've been paying attention." They sat near the window while customers browsed quietly. Gary watched the rain for a long moment before speaking. "Can I tell you something strange?" Maya leaned forward with genuine curiosity. "You can tell me anything." Gary took a deep breath. "A few weeks ago something impossible happened to me. Since then, whenever I meet someone, I can hear what they're thinking. Not guesses. Not body language. Their actual thoughts." He waited for disbelief, laughter, or polite concern. Instead Maya remained completely calm. She studied his face for several silent moments before asking one simple question. "Is that why you notice things about people that nobody else notices?" Gary blinked. "You don't think I'm joking?" Maya shook her head. "No." She smiled gently. "You don't look like someone telling a joke." Gary felt an enormous weight lifting from his shoulders. He explained everything. The coffee shop. The doctor's appointment. The endless chorus of hidden thoughts. The exhaustion. The loneliness. Finally he admitted the one detail that puzzled him most. "There's only one person whose mind I can't hear." Maya tilted her head. "Who?" Gary met her eyes. "You." Silence filled the bookstore. Maya looked down at her coffee, then back at Gary. A slow smile appeared on her face. "That explains something." Gary frowned. "What does it explain?" She laughed softly. "From the day we met, you've listened to every word I said. Everyone else interrupts, assumes, or finishes my sentences. You never do. I thought you were simply unusually patient. Gary smiled. Maybe you taught me how to listen again. Outside, the rain gradually stopped, and sunlight broke through the clouds. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. They simply enjoyed the quiet together. For Gary, it was the first silence in weeks that felt completely peaceful. Because it was shared with the only person whose heart he could never read, yet whose honesty he trusted more with every passing day. After Gary revealed his impossible secret, nothing changed overnight, yet everything felt different. Maya did not bombard him with endless questions or demand proof. Instead, she accepted that whatever Gary had experienced was real to him. That quiet acceptance surprised him more than disbelief ever could have. During the following days they continued meeting as usual, but Gary noticed himself relaxing in ways he had not since the strange ability first appeared. He no longer carried the exhausting burden of hiding such a remarkable truth from the person he trusted most. One afternoon they visited a busy outdoor market filled with colorful stalls, musicians, and families enjoying the warm weather. As they walked together, Gary heard the familiar stream of hidden thoughts surrounding them. A baker hoped his last tray of bread would sell before closing. A tourist silently worried that she had lost her hotel reservation. A child desperately wanted to ask for another piece of candy but knew the answer would probably be no. The thoughts drifted through Gary's mind like gentle waves instead of crashing into him as they once had. Maya watched him observing the crowd. "What are they thinking today?" she asked with a playful smile. Gary laughed quietly. "Mostly ordinary things. Dinner. Work. Family. Small worries. Small dreams." Maya nodded. "That's comforting somehow." Gary looked at her curiously. "Why?" She shrugged. "Because it reminds me that everyone is living a life as complicated as my own." Gary realized that although she could not hear hidden thoughts, she had reached the same conclusion through simple empathy. Later they found a quiet bench overlooking a small lake. Ducks drifted peacefully across the water while the afternoon breeze stirred the trees. Maya suddenly asked, "Does it ever make relationships difficult?" Gary already knew she meant something deeper than friendship. "Very," he admitted. "Imagine knowing every doubt before someone says they're uncertain. Every fear before they admit they're afraid. Every compliment mixed with hidden insecurity. Sometimes I forget that people need time before they're ready to speak honestly." Maya listened carefully. "And yet," she said, "you never use that knowledge against anyone." Gary smiled faintly. "Because hearing thoughts taught me something unexpected. Most people aren't hiding terrible secrets. They're protecting fragile feelings." Maya considered that answer for a long moment before saying, "Then perhaps your gift isn't really about reading minds. Maybe it's about learning compassion." Gary had never thought of it that way. The words settled quietly inside him. As evening approached they walked toward the subway station. A young couple stood nearby discussing apartments. Their spoken conversation sounded cheerful, while Gary heard both secretly worrying about whether they could afford the future they dreamed of building together. He smiled to himself instead of feeling sad. Love, he realized, was often strongest when people shared hope despite uncertainty. Before entering the station Maya stopped walking. "Can I ask you one more question?" Of course. She looked directly into his eyes. If you could lose this ability tomorrow, would you? Gary expected the answer to come immediately, but it did not. Months earlier he would have said yes without hesitation. The constant noise, the unwanted truths, the endless honesty had nearly overwhelmed him. Now the answer was more complicated. I don't know, he admitted. It has taken away every comfortable illusion. But it has also shown me how kind, frightened, generous, lonely, hopeful, and wonderfully human people really are. Without it, I might never have understood that. Maya smiled warmly. Then maybe the question isn't whether you should lose it. She gently took his hand. Maybe the question is what kind of person you choose to become because of it. Gary looked at their hands and then at the countless strangers passing by, each carrying invisible thoughts only he could hear. For the first time since receiving his extraordinary gift, he stopped asking why it had happened to him. Instead, he began asking how he could use it to become wiser, kinder, and more patient. And somehow, that question felt far more important than the mysterious ability itself. Several months passed, and Gary settled into a life unlike anyone else's. He continued hearing the thoughts of every person he met, yet the ability no longer controlled him. Instead of focusing on every hidden sentence, he chose what deserved his attention. He had learned that not every passing thought defined a person. A fleeting worry was not a lifelong belief. A moment of frustration was not someone's true character. The mind was a river, constantly moving, and Gary had finally stopped mistaking every wave for the whole ocean. One bright Monday morning, however, something extraordinary happened. Gary stepped onto a crowded train expecting the familiar chorus of invisible voices. Nothing came. The passengers spoke normally, newspapers rustled, phones vibrated, children laughed, but inside Gary's mind there was complete silence. He looked around in disbelief. A businessman adjusted his tie. A student reviewed notes before an exam. An elderly woman smiled at a sleeping grandchild. Normally Gary would have heard dozens of hidden thoughts before the train reached the next station. This time there was nothing beyond ordinary conversation. His gift had vanished. At first he panicked. Had he lost the ability forever? Was something wrong? Throughout the day he tested it repeatedly. He spoke with coworkers, ordered lunch from a cafe, even asked strangers for directions he did not need. Every interaction felt wonderfully ordinary. Nobody's thoughts reached him. Only their spoken words remained. That evening Gary hurried to the bookstore. Maya immediately noticed his unusual expression. Something happened, she said. Gary smiled with equal parts excitement and confusion. I can't hear anyone today. Maya closed the book she had been organizing. Really? He nodded enthusiastically. Not a single thought since this morning. Instead of celebrating immediately, Maya asked a different question. How did it make you feel? Gary paused. He had expected relief, but the answer surprised him. Lonely, he admitted. At first I thought it would feel peaceful. Instead it felt like the whole world suddenly moved farther away. Maya listened quietly. Gary continued, for months I've understood people in a way I never thought possible. Today I realized how much I had come to rely on that understanding. I kept wondering what everyone was feeling, and for the first time I had no idea. Maya smiled gently. Maybe today was a reminder. A reminder of what? That everyone else lives like this every day. Gary laughed softly. You're right. They left the bookstore together and walked through the evening streets. Gary found himself watching faces more carefully than usual. Without hidden thoughts, he noticed tiny expressions, hesitant smiles, nervous laughter, and quiet gestures that he had overlooked since gaining his ability. He realized how much people communicated without saying a word. An old couple walking hand in hand needed no spoken explanation. A teenager offering his seat to a tired mother revealed kindness without thinking about it. A friend placing a reassuring hand on another friend's shoulder spoke louder than any sentence. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, they reached a bridge overlooking the river. Gary leaned against the railing and closed his eyes for a moment. Suddenly, without warning, the familiar voices returned. I hope tomorrow is easier. I should call my brother tonight. That sunset is more beautiful than I expected. Gary opened his eyes and smiled. The gift had returned as quietly as it had disappeared. Maya noticed the expression on his face. They're back, aren't they? Gary nodded. Yes. She laughed. I had a feeling they would. They remained on the bridge watching the lights reflect across the water. Gary no longer felt relieved that the ability had returned, nor disappointed that it had disappeared for a day. Instead, he felt grateful for both experiences. One had taught him how deeply people thought and felt beneath the surface. The other had reminded him that genuine understanding was still possible even without extraordinary gifts. And as the invisible voices blended gently with the sounds of the evening city, Gary realized that the greatest connections in life were never built by knowing every thought. They were built by choosing, day after day, to care about another person whether every answer was known or not. Autumn arrived quietly, covering the city in golden leaves and cool evening air. Gary had stopped thinking of his ability as something temporary. It had become part of his life, like his reflection in a mirror or the sound of his own footsteps. The thoughts of strangers still surrounded him every day, yet they no longer distracted him from the present. Instead, they reminded him that every person carried hopes they rarely shared aloud. One Saturday morning, Maya unlocked the bookstore and found Gary already waiting outside with 2 cups of coffee. She laughed. You're becoming predictable. Gary smiled. Only in good ways, I hope. As they stepped inside, Maya paused for a moment before speaking. I've been thinking about something. Gary waited. Ever since you told me about your gift, I've wondered why you can hear everyone except me. Gary nodded. I've wondered the same thing every single day. Maya walked slowly between the shelves, gently touching the spines of the books as if searching for the right words. Maybe it isn't because I'm different, she said. Maybe it's because you don't need to hear my thoughts. Gary looked at her with curiosity. She continued, You've never had to guess whether I respected you or cared about you, because I've always tried to say those things honestly. Perhaps your gift only fills the silence that people leave between what they think and what they say. Gary had never considered that possibility. He replayed every conversation they had shared. Maya rarely hid her feelings. If she was happy, she showed it. If she disagreed, she explained why with kindness. If she appreciated someone, she told them instead of keeping it locked inside. There was almost no distance between her thoughts and her words. Later that afternoon they volunteered at a neighborhood reading event for children. Maya read stories while Gary helped organize books and welcomed families. As always, he heard countless hidden thoughts around him. Parents hoped their children would grow up curious. Children dreamed about adventures that seemed impossible. Volunteers quietly worried whether enough people would attend. The invisible voices painted a picture of ordinary lives filled with extraordinary dreams. During a break, a little girl approached Gary holding a book almost as large as she was. "Do you think this story is good?" she asked shyly. Gary smiled before answering. At the same moment he heard her unspoken thought. "I hope he says yes because I already chose it." He knelt to her height. "I think it's a wonderful choice." Her face lit up with happiness, and she ran back to her mother. Maya watched the exchange from across the room. "You knew exactly what she needed to hear, didn't you?" Gary nodded softly. Sometimes the smallest encouragement changes someone's whole day. When the event ended, the organizer thanked every volunteer. As people packed away tables and books, Gary heard dozens of quiet thoughts filled with satisfaction. Nobody had become famous. Nobody had earned a fortune. Yet nearly everyone left believing the afternoon had mattered. Walking home beneath streets covered in fallen leaves, Maya suddenly reached for Gary's hand. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Words felt unnecessary. Finally Maya smiled and said, "Can I make you a promise?" "Of course." She looked directly at him. "No matter what happens in the future, I'll always try to make my words match my heart." Gary felt something deeper than relief. He felt peace. He squeezed her hand gently. "Then I'll make you one too. I'll never use what I hear to judge people. I'll use it only to understand them." The evening breeze carried leaves across the quiet sidewalk as they continued walking together. Around them, hundreds of hidden thoughts flowed through Gary's mind like a gentle current. Yet among all those invisible voices, the promise Maya had spoken aloud felt stronger than anything he could ever hear in silence. Winter arrived with crisp mornings and bright evenings filled with festive lights. Nearly a year had passed since the impossible morning when Gary first heard another person's thoughts inside his own mind. The ability had changed every part of his life, yet its greatest gift had not been the knowledge it provided. It had been the patience it taught him. One evening Gary and Maya were invited to a small gathering hosted by Julia. Friends and family filled the apartment with laughter, homemade food, and familiar conversations. Gary listened to the invisible thoughts surrounding him as naturally as he listened to music playing softly in the background. His father complimented the meal while privately hoping everyone felt welcome. Julia laughed with her friends while quietly wondering whether Gary seemed happier than he had been months before. A neighbor nervously rehearsed the speech he wanted to give during an upcoming job interview. Every hidden thought carried a simple human wish, to be accepted, understood, or loved. As the evening continued, Julia stepped onto the balcony where Gary had gone to enjoy a little fresh air. "You've changed," she said with a warm smile. Gary leaned against the railing. "Hopefully for the better." Julia nodded. "Definitely for the better." At that same moment Gary heard her unspoken thought. I don't know what happened this year, but whatever it was gave my brother his smile back. Gary felt an unexpected wave of gratitude. Months earlier he might have focused on the mystery of his strange ability. Now he noticed something else. The people who loved him rarely thought about themselves when they looked at him. They simply hoped he was happy. Maya joined them a few minutes later carrying 3 mugs of hot chocolate. Julia excused herself, leaving the two of them alone beneath the clear winter sky. You seem thoughtful, Maya said. Gary smiled. I was just realizing something. What is it? He looked toward the glowing windows where their family and friends continued talking. For a long time I believed honesty meant knowing every hidden thought. Now I think honesty is something else. Maya waited patiently. It's choosing to say the important things before they become regrets. Maya's eyes softened. I like that very much. They stood together in comfortable silence while snowflakes began drifting gently through the night air. Gary heard countless invisible thoughts inside the apartment. People were making plans for the coming year. They remembered old holidays. They hoped life would become a little kinder, a little simpler, a little brighter. None of those hopes sounded extraordinary on their own. Together they formed a beautiful picture of humanity. As the evening came to an end, everyone gathered near the front door to say goodbye. Hugs were exchanged. Promises to meet again were made. Gary heard the quiet sincerity behind almost every farewell. Let's not wait so long next time. Drive home safely. I'm grateful we spent today together. Walking home beside Maya through the softly falling snow, Gary realized that the world had never become less mysterious simply because he could hear hidden thoughts. If anything, people had become even more fascinating. Every person carried countless memories, dreams, fears, and acts of quiet kindness that no stranger would ever fully know. His extraordinary gift had revealed only one layer of that endless complexity. Maya slipped her hand into his as they crossed the empty street. Gary smiled. Knowing that her thoughts remained the only ones forever beyond his reach. Strangely, he no longer wanted to change that. Some mysteries were not obstacles to love. They were the reason trust existed at all. And as they disappeared into the peaceful winter evening together, Gary understood that the most meaningful truth in his life had never been the ability to read minds. It was the choice to believe in a heart even when its thoughts remained beautifully unknown. Spring returned to the city exactly 1 year after Gary's extraordinary life had begun. The trees that had stood bare through winter were covered with fresh green leaves once again, and the familiar streets felt both unchanged and completely different. Every morning Gary still heard the quiet stream of thoughts flowing from the people around him. A cyclist hoped he would not be late for work. A grandmother wondered what dessert to bake for her grandchildren. A student silently repeated encouraging words before an important presentation. The invisible voices had become as natural as birds singing in the distance. They no longer amazed him. What amazed him now was how much courage ordinary people carried without anyone noticing. One Saturday afternoon Gary and Maya returned to the same bookstore where they had first met. Nothing inside had changed. The wooden shelves still held thousands of stories waiting to be opened. Sunlight still poured through the front window. The small reading chair where Maya had recommended Gary his first novel remained exactly where it had been. They smiled at the memory. "Funny," Maya said, "one recommendation changed both our lives." Gary laughed. "I came looking for a book. I found a completely different story." They spent the afternoon organizing new arrivals together. Customers came and went, each bringing another wave of hidden thoughts into Gary's mind. Some worried about work. Some searched for inspiration. Others simply wanted a quiet place to rest for a while. Gary greeted every visitor with the same kindness because he had learned something simple but powerful. Every person deserved compassion whether he could hear their thoughts or not. As the store prepared to close, Maya locked the front door and turned the sign to indicate they were finished for the day. She walked toward Gary with the same warm smile that had greeted him on the day they first met. "Can I ask you one last question about your gift?" she said. "Anything." She looked at him thoughtfully. "After everything you've experienced, what is the greatest truth you've discovered?" Gary did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the quiet bookstore filled with stories about imaginary worlds. Then he looked back at the woman whose thoughts had always remained a mystery. Finally he spoke. "I used to think people were hiding who they really were. Now I know they're simply carrying more inside them than words can easily express. Every person is fighting small battles, protecting quiet dreams, remembering precious moments, and hoping someone will understand them. Hearing thoughts didn't teach me how different people are. It taught me how similar we all are." Maya smiled with tears shining gently in her eyes. "I think that's the most beautiful answer you could have given." They stepped outside into the golden light of early evening. The city was alive with conversations, footsteps, laughter, and the endless current of unspoken thoughts that only Gary could hear. Yet among thousands of invisible voices, one thing remained wonderfully unchanged. Maya's mind was still silent. Gary realized he no longer saw that silence as a mystery needing an answer. It had become a reminder that love was never built on knowing everything. Love was built on listening, trusting, forgiving, and choosing one another again and again. As they walked hand in hand through the streets, Gary heard countless hidden hopes surrounding them, but he no longer searched for certainty in every thought. Some truths were spoken aloud. Others were quietly lived through everyday actions. And the greatest story of his life had never been about a man who could read every mind. It had been about a man who discovered that the strongest human connection begins not where every secret is revealed, but where trust remains even when some thoughts are forever unknown. With that realization, Gary smiled toward the future, knowing that no matter how many minds he could read, the heart would always remain the most extraordinary story of all.